Hello, my name is Les Wicker, and we're beginning the third of a series of programs that I have entitled 3 Things You Must Understand. And we've been talking over the first couple, and I hope you'll be patient with me because, as I said in our earlier introduction, these things are going to take a little time to explain and develop. So I hope that you'll be patient. But we are sort of in the midst of a discussion about the first of these 3 things that you must understand, and that is that the evidence of creation is that it was created, designed with intention and purpose, and could not and did not occur by blind chance, which is what Darwinian evolution basically teaches, that all that was necessary was the right chemical combinations to come together, and poof, here we are. Well, it didn't happen that way, and what the aspect of our study right now is generally called the teleological argument, and what we're looking at are things like the complexity of our eye, which is oftentimes compared to a camera, and just the same way that you would not expect I just flipped the timer on that. You might be able to hear that. But at any rate, there's no film in it, so don't worry, I'm not wasting film shooting at the wall over there. But at any rate, just as you would not expect a camera like this, and this one here is single lens reflex, a 35 millimeter, fairly simple compared to today's technology with digital cameras and all. But this one makes a good illustration for the eye. But just the way you wouldn't expect a camera like this to wash up on the beach and say, well, look what evolved out of the ocean. That doesn't make any sense to anybody. And everybody knows it. And I am just saying things here today that are obvious to most people who think about things like that, and that is that design and complexity, things which are complicated and detailed and meticulously put together, do not happen by chance. It hasn't happened that way in the past, it isn't happening now, and it will not happen in the future. A camera will not evolve by blind chance, no matter how many, even if you had all the parts of this camera and shook them up in a shoebox for a zillion years, you would still not get this camera put together like this. And the same way with an arrowhead. If you had we talked about the arrowheads, a relatively simple design, although it takes some skill to create one, to make one. But we talked about the fact that, well, I don't know if I said this, but if you had a rock that was the size of the Earth and all of our planets in our solar system, and you pounded them up into little pieces about the size of this arrowhead, you would never get an arrowhead like this that is symmetrical and elliptical and thin in shape, because it requires intention, it requires design, it requires planning, it requires purpose. Even if you had the material, it would never occur by chance. And that's the point that we're trying to make right now. And we're sort of coming to the end of a discussion of one human eye. And we got to the place here that we were talking about how the light waves of this tree here come through the cornea and through the iris that opens up and closes according to the light that is coming into it and what is needed. And then it goes through the lens of the eye and back through the vitreous humor, which holds the ball, the sphere shape of the eye. It's a pressurized fluid, a gel-like substance, as well as the cornea is also a pressurized fluid. And it falls back on the retina upside down, as you can see in my illustration here. And we began to talk about the complexity of the retina. I'm going to finish up here. We've got to find a stopping place to this study. But there are 375 million rods and cones throughout the retina, and about 1 inch. Your eye is a little more than 1 inch wide. And so in this retina, you've got 375 million rods and cones arranged in a very, very intricate, complex, and staggeringly precise arrangement and composition that goes back to your visual cortex, where nobody knows what happens. That's just the truth. Nobody knows how it works to create a sharp focus, moving picture inside our heads. Color picture, by the way. Now, we talked about the fact that the visual cortex, when it had all of these optic fibers that were coming out in front. There's one animal, by the way, that they come into the back, at least one that I'm aware of, which is the octopus. They come from the back, but and there may be others that I'm not aware of. But ours come in the front, and they're all perfectly clear. And we began to talk about the fact that wouldn't this, if God did not, if the design was not such that you have the optic nerve, the main optic nerve, lowered, then you would have a blind spot. And the fact is that you do have a blind spot. But there is a ingenious design that creates your sharpest focus in an area called the macula, which is right in here. It's where you have the very sharpest, actually a little indentation right there. And the optic nerve is below the macula. You've probably heard of macular degeneration. Well, the degeneration of the macula is this area right here. And what happens is the rods begin to thin out as it comes into the macula, and they thin completely out. When they come into this, it's called the fovea. This little indentation right here is called the fovea. It's where you have the absolute sharpest focus that you have in your visual sight. And the fovea is only cones, highly packed cones. There's no rods in there. They thin out, and they are all in a very, very particular arrangement. And so you see the optic nerve is lowered slightly out of the center of the vision, and the macula is placed in the central sharp focus point within your field of vision. The macula is a concentration of rods and cones, and in the middle of the macula, as I said, is a special place called the fovea where the rods thin out, and there is an indentation of highly packed cones, and this is the area of your sharpest focus. Now, incidentally, your blind spot is still there, but you have no awareness of it. There is a blind spot, and there's certain experiments that you can do with your sight, and you can actually see your blind spot or the absence of your blind spot, but I won't get into that right now. But you do have a blind spot, but it's down here where you have no awareness of it because of the ingenious design system and how the eye is composed. There are many, many other things that we could talk about just related to the eye, the organ of the eye. And as we said, where all of those millions of nerves go back into the brain and how they are interpreted into a full color, real-time, sharp focus, moving picture remains a mystery, even in this age of technology and medical advance. Is it simple or is it complex? That's what we want to know. And as I said, that was what I've said here, and then the other programs is the briefest kind of summary explanation of some of the workings of the eye. But if we can discern intellect, planning, design, and will in an arrowhead or a camera like this, how is it that we can fail to recognize it in something that is infinitely more complex and living? The point I want to make here is that what we have just studied, the human eye, is an insurmountable problem for the evolutionist, because in order for evolution to occur, you have to have a progression from simple to complex occur through the mechanism of mutation, and if the mutation is not beneficial to the organism, then according to the theory, in the next generation, the detrimental mutation would be eliminated. So if theoretically a mutation could produce a cornea, which incidentally the genetic code would prevent in any rational discussion or conversation about this, but I am entertaining a little foolishness just for the sake of teaching. But if a mutation could produce a cornea, it would be eliminated in the next generation according to evolutionary teaching, because it would be totally useless to the organism unless everything was present. A cornea is not an eye. Just like a retina is not an eye. You can't have just a retina. You can't have just a vitreous humor. You can't have just a lens. You can't have just an iris. You can't have just a cornea. You've got to have everything working together, plus the visual, plus have it all connected to the visual cortex. Unless everything is in place, working, nothing works. It all either works together or it doesn't work. Period. Not only can an accidental mutation not produce a human eye, it can't produce any eye. Flies have eyes. Flies have compound eyes that are very different from ours. And there is no slow process of evolution that can explain even a housefly's eyes, because there are no primitive eyes. Now, the evolutionists like to talk about the octopus and how that it has light sensors on its skin. Well, that's fine, good, but the octopus also has eyes, 2 of them, symmetrically placed. So that doesn't give any evidence, that gives no explanation or indication of the evolution of eyes. They are all complex. There are no primitive eyes. And each species has its own characteristic distinctions. The turtle, for example, this is just one. We could talk about the dragonfly's eyes. If you ever looked at insects' eyes, well, they're just amazing. Sadie, can you find one of those pictures of the dragonfly's eyes or any other insect eyes over there? They're hexagon in shape, like a honeycomb is. And there can be anywhere from, I think, 6,000 to about 28,000 of these hexagon shapes coming out in a fly's eyes. And each one, even among insects, they're all distinct. But I was going to talk about turtle eyes for a second. Now, the reason that I'm saying among the reasons I'm saying that this could not have evolved from one eye, eye that evolved into all kinds of different eyes, is because all different eyes are different. They have very individual and distinct qualities that are unique to the species. Turtles, for example. Turtles, incidentally, let me show you this. Talking about, I just got a few things I brought from home here. Turtles, here's turtle shells. And turtle shell, this is a box turtle, as you can see. Beautifully designed, very symmetrical, as you can see. This one here has, thank you, Sadie. I'll look at that in just a moment. Look at the. I hope you can see the symmetry of the plates and the bones and how perfectly they fit together and how perfectly they are rounded and sculpted, and have this little helmet like rim that goes out. That's just a box turtle. Now here's another one. But turtles are very interesting creatures, and they were designed that way. But the eyes of a turtle are such that if their pond, they're living in a pond, and their pond dries up, did you know that they will all, if a pond dries up, you'll see all the turtles in that pond heading directly the same direction. They'll all go one way or another to the next pond, the pond that is closest to them. How is that? Can you imagine how they would know where the pond is that's closest to them? Well, they have an eye that is capable of seeing infrared light that comes from the sun, bounces off of the pond, and looks like a laser beam probably to them that shoots back up, reflects off of the earth on the pond, and the reflection goes back up. They can see the reflection that goes back up, and they know exactly where to go, and it's been observed many times. So turtles are amazing. I mean, turtle eyes are amazing, and the whole turtle is amazing, and every creature that God created is amazing like that. It has very, very individual and unique things that are unique to that creature. Well, now I want to make some more problems for the evolutionists at this point, and it's not very hard because all the evidence points so conclusively to intelligent design. We've talked about some of the workings of one eye. What would be the chances of one eye evolving from non-living matter by blind chance? And by the way, non-living matter doesn't look for a way to improve itself. But I'm being generous, and I'm granting the non-living matter, although they can't tell me the origin of the non-living matter or the natural forces. In other words, I could ask the real question by saying, what are the chances of one eye coming from nothing? That's the real question. But you see, I'll go ahead and give them the matter because it doesn't matter. You still can't get an eye. I think you would agree that the answer is zero. There is no chance. There is no chance to get an eye from non-living matter by blind chance, because the more complex a thing is, the more remote the possibility that it could have occurred by chance. And that is well-established law. You just don't get complexity in design from randomness. But allow me to multiply problems once more. Now, if it is impossible to get one eye from any slow evolutionary process, what would be the possibility of two identical eyes evolving in the same head that work together to perceive exact distances, such as you need to thread a needle, depth perception it's called. So if it's impossible to get one eye from blind chance, two eyes, more than double the odds against it, right? Let me multiply some more problems. What would be the possibility of one ear that is equally as complex as one eye evolving in the same head? Again, the mechanism of mutation still being the only explanation for such. And if there was ever any chance that one ear could evolve, what would be the chances of another ear identical to it, to the first, evolving from non-living matter by blind chance on the other side of the head, symmetrically positioned and admirably placed? Well, it's still zero. The chances of that are still zero. There's no chance. And you could see why evolutionists continue to conveniently overlook these facts. Symmetry comes from design. And I've heard evolutionists say that, well, there must be a gene for symmetry because, there's so many things in the natural world that are symmetrical. Here's something. I mean, this is just a part of I bet you know what that is. Most of you can identify that. It's the back end of a horseshoe crab But you can see that that is beautifully symmetrical. Perhaps you can see it better on my shirt here. And the evolutionists make the argument oftentimes that there's a gene, some kind of a code in there that makes everything symmetrical. That's why we have 2 eyes and 2 ears and the same amount of teeth on one side and on the other, 2 lungs, etc. Well, that cannot be so, because even though we appear to be symmetrical, I mean, if I turn this way, I'm no longer symmetrical. I'm only symmetrical this way for one thing. I'm not symmetrical this way. But here's the other thing. Even though our bodies appear to be symmetrical on the front, it's deceiving, because our heart is not symmetrical. Our stomach is not symmetrical. Our pancreas is on one side. Our liver is on is not symmetrical. It's not even in the center. So there's all these organs that are internal that are not symmetrical. So if there's a gene in there that says everything has to be symmetrical, why is it not acting consistently? It isn't. So it has to be designed that way. It has to be designed to look symmetrical when it actually isn't on the inside. Now, I want to infinitely compound problems for the evolutionists once more by noticing that an eye cannot function by itself. An eye has to have the brain to interpret the signals. But here's the next problem. The brain cannot function by itself. It must have the heart to pump blood to it. But wait, if you've got all 3 of those elements, it still doesn't work, because the heart cannot operate by itself. It must have the lungs to provide oxygen. And on and on and on we could go. The fact is that unless you have the whole body, unless the whole body is complete with all of the organs and all of the complex systems of the body, all existing and functioning, nothing works. Nothing works unless everything works, because the systems of the body are interdependent, not independent. You can't take your eye out and set it over here on the table and have it look back at you. It is dependent on everything else in the body. So the question arises, could the undirected element of chance chemical reactions, have brought all these independently complex parts together in the same instant, simultaneously, to create such an internally interdependent marvel that is our human body? Well, the answer is still 0. 0, 0, 0. No chance. There is no chance. And you can take a row of zeros around the earth and out past the moon and the sun, across the Milky Way galaxy, and all you will ever find is zeros. Sometimes I wonder if we human beings have not lost our minds. We have become so open-minded that our brains have fallen out, or we've become educated beyond our intelligence. Look, I want to make something very, very clear. That is that I am not saying that the idea that God created the human body and everything else is just as valid an explanation of our origins as is evolution. I am saying that the evidence is so overwhelming that you have to be taught out of what should be obvious in order to believe it. That's why I despise the constant promotion and indoctrination of evolution by the educational establishment, because they are teaching children out of what they know instinctively. That is, that there is a God who created them and loves them. I am convinced that most people who have accepted evolution generally in the past were not convinced by evidence, but rather have been victims of what we might call groupthink or herd mentality. Or perhaps they wanted to be viewed as intellectual or a contemporary thinker, enlightened and scientific. The truth is that all the evidence is on one side. the side of God creating the heavens and the earth. Just like Genesis 1:1 says. Faith in evolution is intellectual laziness. Nothing becomes more complex by itself. Darwin's theory of evolution is a 150-year-old outdated system that Darwin himself would have rejected had he known what we know today, like the complex genetic codes of DNA and RNA, where each cell has about 60,000 different proteins that combine in hundreds of different structures. In every single one of your 100 trillion cells, there is a universe of complexity that evolution can never explain. And a veil of billions and billions of years cannot make plausible. But it's still taught. It's still taught as though it's established fact, when in fact, the emperor has no clothes. Do you remember that children's fable? Jamie, hand me that book right there. Pardon me. The Emperor's New Clothes. Does anybody remember that story? Here's a very vain emperor, and he's always dressing up and looking cool, and he's very vain and prideful. And there are some weavers that come along that are very sly and wise. And what happens is, these weavers say, well, we can make you a set of clothes that is so wonderful that only the wise and the understanding can see them. And so what happens is the emperor commissions these two weavers to weave this special, wonderful garment, and then make an outfit for the emperor to wear as he parades through the street. And I'll read just a portion of this. He said, he sent his faithful old prime minister to look at the cloth in his place. The weavers led the prime minister to their loom. He could not see us. He couldn't see a single thread. Oh dear, he thought, if the emperor finds out I can't see the cloth, I will lose my job. I must pretend I can see it. It's the most beautiful piece of cloth in the world, he told the emperor on his return to the palace. The emperor decided perhaps he would go and see it for himself after all. He gathered his favorite counselors around him and went to the weavers. Show us our beautiful new cloth, he said. Can you not see it? It is there on the loom, said the weavers. So it is, said the emperor, his voice full of admiration and his heart full of shame, because he could not see the cloth either. But then neither could anyone else see it, though everyone thought everyone else could see it. There were so many exclamations of delight at the beauty of the new cloth, it really was quite astonishing in the circumstances. Make me a suit of the clothes from the cloth, and I will wear it in the procession tomorrow. And the emperor, outwardly smiling and inwardly trembling. Well, I don't have time to go through the whole rest of this book, but you will remember that the emperor went out, and there was one little boy who had the nerve to say, "The emperor has no clothes." The establishment of evolutionary teaching is the emperor today. And in the epitome of pride and arrogance, he wants to hold the degree that says, I have discovered the origin of life. Well, sorry. God beat you to it. That's all the time I've got for today. We'll continue next time.